November 19, 1942, Liverpool. In a sealed room beneath blackout curtains, one woman in a naval uniform stands over a linoleum floor painted to resemble the Atlantic Ocean. No waves, no wind, only chalk lines, cigarette smoke, and silence. Every decision she makes here will decide whether real ships survive outside this room. Across from her stands a senior admiral, playing the enemy submarine. He believes this is a formality. She knows it is a reckoning. Her name is Janet Okell. Within minutes, the submarine is gone, then gone again, and again. How did a woman with no ship learn to destroy the enemy without ever going to sea? 2. The most compelling detail is almost equal to 200, 300 words. What happens in that sealed room is not luck, and it is not theater. It is repetition, precision, proof. The Admiral takes the role of the U-boat again, altering his approach, changing speed, shifting angles, convinced the outcome will finally differ. It does not. Each time, the same pattern closes around him, the same search logic, the same silent compression of space, the same result. The submarine is found. The submarine is destroyed. This matters because it happens more than once. 5 runs, 5 defeats. Not against an inexperienced officer, but against the man responsible for defending Britain's Atlantic lifeline. In a war where survival depends on learning faster than the enemy, repetition is everything. One success can be dismissed as coincidence. 5 becomes doctrine. The floor beneath their feet is only linoleum, but the consequences extend far beyond the room. Every line drawn in chalk represents a real convoy. Every corrected mistake stands in for sailors who will not die later. What is being tested here is not courage under fire, but clarity under pressure. The ability to think like the enemy, anticipate his instincts, and close the trap before panic sets in. By the end of a session, the Admiral no longer treats the exercise as a demonstration. He treats it as instruction. The lesson is simple and brutal. The Atlantic War will not be won by bigger ships alone, but by better thinking. And the person who has just proven that truth does so without a rank to command men, without a ship to sail, and without ever leaving land. Janet Okell was not born into strategy rooms or naval tradition. She entered adulthood as Europe collapsed into total war, at a moment when Britain's survival depended less on heroics than on logistics. By 1941, German U-boats were strangling the Atlantic. Food, fuel, and munitions crossed the ocean under constant threat. Tonnage losses were not abstractions. They translated into ration cuts, factory stoppages, and the quiet arithmetic of hunger. The sea became a ledger where mistakes were paid for in lives. Britain responded by improvising. Ships were built faster, convoys reorganized, air cover extended. But the deeper problem remained intellectual. Escorts chased contacts that vanished. Submarines struck at night, submerged into darkness and confusion. Doctrine lagged behind reality. The enemy adapted faster than the manuals. Into this gap came the Western Approaches Tactical Unit, formed in early 1942 in Liverpool, close to the nerve center of Atlantic Command. Its purpose was deceptively simple. Understand how U-boats actually fought, then teach escort commanders how to counter them. No lectures, no abstractions, only simulated battles replayed again and again until patterns emerged. The unit drew heavily from the Women's Royal Naval Service. Wrens were available disciplined, and crucially, unburdened by the habits of traditional command. They were trained to think, not to perform, to argue with rank using logic, to lose simulated ships repeatedly until the reasons became unmistakable. Janet Okell was among the youngest. Barely out of her teens, she entered a world where the cost of error was understood with terrifying clarity. Each exercise represented real men already dead, or not yet dead. The work demanded emotional restraint. No cheering when a submarine was caught. No relief when a convoy survived. Only analysis, revision, and repetition. What set Okell apart was not authority, which she did not possess, but control. She absorbed enemy behavior with unnerving calm. Where others reacted, she anticipated. Where others chased, she waited. She learned that submarines did not think in straight lines, and that the ocean favored patience over aggression. Her decisions were quiet, almost minimal, but they closed space efficiently, leaving no escape that mattered. The setting amplified the pressure. Blackout curtains sealed the room. News of sinkings arrived daily. Time was not theoretical. Every week of delay meant more losses at sea. The urgency sharpened thinking, stripped away ego, and rewarded those who could see beyond accepted wisdom. By the time senior officers began to pass through the unit, Okell was no longer a trainee. She was a tactician, not in title, but in effect. Her understanding of search patterns, convoy noise, and enemy psychology had hardened into method. She did not argue loudly. She demonstrated outcomes. Again and again. This was the origin of her influence. Not a single dramatic moment, but the slow accumulation of certainty. In a war decided by margins, she learned how to make inevitability feel routine. And when commanders arrived skeptical, she met them not with explanation, but with results. The first obstacle was not the enemy. It was disbelief. The Western approach's tactical unit challenged everything the Navy had relied on for decades, and that alone invited resistance. Officers arrived carrying habits shaped by rank, by tradition, by years at sea. They were accustomed to command, not contradiction. Inside the sealed room, those instincts worked against them. For Janet Okell, the imbalance was stark. She was young. She was a woman. She held no authority beyond the clarity of her thinking. Each session placed her in quiet opposition to men whose decisions governed thousands of lives. The room demanded a reversal of hierarchy. The rank on a sleeve meant less than the logic on the floor. This inversion unsettled visitors long before it educated them. There was also the weight of consequence. Unlike field commanders, the women of Wadu could not discharge fear through action. They absorbed it. Every simulation replayed real disasters from the Atlantic. Ships torpedoed at night, escorts misled by noise, convoys scattering into vulnerability. When a tactic failed on the linoleum, it echoed failures that had already killed men whose names were now lists on notice boards. The pressure did not come in moments of adrenaline, but in sustained awareness. The tactical problem itself was unforgiving. German U-boats exploited confusion. They attacked under cover of darkness, surfaced among convoys, then vanished into ambiguity. Traditional doctrine urged escorts to spread out, to chase every contact. This created gaps. It diluted force. It rewarded the submarine's patience. To change this required commanders to accept something deeply uncomfortable. That restraint could be deadlier than pursuit. Okell learned quickly that proposing new ideas was not enough. She had to let commanders fail inside the game. Only repeated defeat loosened certainty. Only patterns, emerging without commentary, forced reconsideration. It was a slow, methodical erosion of confidence in old assumptions. Emotionally, the cost accumulated. Success did not bring relief. Each correct decision simply raised the standard for the next one. The margin for error narrowed. There was no room for exhaustion, no allowance for hesitation. The enemy adapted constantly, and any tactic that worked today risked becoming obsolete tomorrow. Thinking had to stay ahead of fear. Outside the unit, the war pressed inward. Losses in early 1942 were catastrophic. Convoys vanished faster than they could be replaced. Britain's supply lines strained under arithmetic that left no room for sentiment. Every improvement had to matter. Every hour spent arguing doctrine was an hour lost at sea. Inside the room, the conflict sharpened into a quieter form. Okell and her colleagues faced the burden of persuasion without authority. They could not order adoption. They could only demonstrate inevitability. This required discipline bordering on emotional suppression. No triumph when an admiral was defeated. No satisfaction when resistance cracked. Only the continuation of work. The most difficult moments came when skepticism hardened into dismissal. Some officers treated the exercises as intellectual curiosities. Others saw them as challenges to their competence. A few resented being instructed by women whose battlefield existed only in paint and chalk. Each reaction threatened to stall progress. What overcame resistance was not rhetoric. It was time. Each visit added data. Each loss inside the game mirrored losses outside it. Slowly, grudgingly, the gap between theory and reality closed. The room began to change minds not through persuasion, but through accumulation. By the end of 1942, the conflict within WADA was no longer about whether the methods worked. It was about whether the Navy could afford to ignore them. For Okell, the struggle remained invisible. Her victories left no wreckage, no medals, no headlines. Only patterns that refused to be disproved. And in a war measured by survival, that was enough. The work inside Western Approach's tactical unit followed a rhythm that stripped war down to its essentials. No speeches, no summaries, only movement, reaction, and consequence. The linoleum floor became a map where distance mattered more than drama. Each exercise began with the same premise. Assume the enemy is intelligent, patient, and learning. Anything less was fantasy. Janet Okell approached these sessions with a discipline that bordered on severity. She did not chase the submarine. She constrained it. Her method relied on subtraction rather than force, removing options until only one remained. Escorts were not scattered to cover everything. They were concentrated to deny escape. Noise, once treated as interference, was reframed as signal. Convoys were not liabilities to be protected at all costs, but instruments that shaped the enemy's decisions. What emerged was a pattern of thinking rather than a single maneuver. The objective was not immediate contact, but inevitability. By anticipating where a U-boat needed to be next, Okell collapsed time. The submarine could still move, but every movement reduced its future choices. In the game, this compression felt subtle. In reality, it meant detection before attack and survival before loss. Central to this approach was what would later be formalized as beta search. The idea ran counter to instinct. Instead of multiple escorts sweeping wide arcs, one ship accelerated directly toward the most probable contact point, using the convoy's own noise to mask its movement. Speed replaced coverage. Certainty replaced panic. The tactic punished hesitation and rewarded commitment. Inside the room, Okell enforced this logic relentlessly. When commanders hesitated, the submarine slipped through. When they overreacted, gaps opened. Only when they accepted the discomfort of doing less did the outcome change. Each failure was replayed, dissected, and run again until the lesson could no longer be avoided. The effectiveness of this method lay in its teachability. It could be learned quickly, remembered under pressure, and executed without perfect information. That mattered. The Atlantic did not reward elegance. It rewarded decisions that held under exhaustion, fear, and darkness. As confidence in the exercises grew, so did their reach. Officers arriving skeptical began to leave altered. They stopped asking whether the tactics were correct and started asking how to implement them faster. The unit expanded its schedule. Sessions ran continuously. The feedback loop tightened as reports from sea confirmed what the floor had predicted. Throughout this expansion, Okell remained a constant. She adjusted variables, refined assumptions, and removed anything that depended on luck. Her authority came from consistency. She did not claim the tactic would always work. She showed that it worked more often than anything else available. By mid-war, the games were no longer experiments. They were preparation. What happened on the linoleum floor now shaped decisions made in darkness hundreds of miles away. The distance between thought and action narrowed. And with each iteration, the margin of survival widened. What turned these methods from insight into impact was scale. The Western Approach's tactical unit was not designed to produce a single brilliant solution, but to manufacture understanding at speed. Officers rotated through the room in a constant stream. Escort commanders, staff planners, analysts, each bringing fresh assumptions and leaving with fewer illusions. The games became a common language, a way to argue tactics without ego. Janet Okell played a central role in this translation. She adjusted scenarios to reflect the Atlantic as it actually behaved, not as it was imagined to behave. When intelligence reports suggested new enemy patterns, the floor changed. When convoys altered composition, the variables shifted. Nothing remained static. This responsiveness mattered because the enemy never paused. Each German adaptation demanded an answer, and answers had to be ready before losses mounted. The sessions grew more severe. Night actions replaced daylight clarity. Communications failed mid-game. Escorts were removed without warning to simulate damage or mechanical failure. Decisions had to be made with incomplete information, under time pressure that mirrored reality. The objective was not perfection, but resilience. Tactics that collapsed under stress were discarded. Those that held were refined. What distinguished Okell's approach was a refusal to personalize outcomes. Success was not attributed to individual brilliance, but to method. When an officer executed a maneuver correctly, she pressed further. When they failed, she did not explain immediately. She reran the sequence until cause and effect became unavoidable. Learning arrived through experience, not instruction. As graduates returned to sea, confirmation arrived in fragments. Reports of convoys surviving attacks that would once have succeeded. Submarines forced to break contact earlier. Escorts maintaining cohesion instead of scattering into vulnerability. No single report proved anything. Together, they formed a pattern that aligned precisely with what the floor had predicted. The unit's influence expanded beyond individual tactics. It reshaped how commanders thought about uncertainty. Instead of reacting to each contact as an isolated threat, they began to manage probability. Instead of dispersing strength to cover fear, they concentrated it to impose logic. This shift was subtle but decisive. It transformed the Atlantic from a series of ambushes into a contest of anticipation. For Okell, the work remained uncelebrated. She did not brief Parliament. She did not command ships. Her contribution existed in the narrowing gap between detection and destruction, in the hours of safety earned by convoys that never knew her name. The absence of recognition was not an oversight. It was built into the system. Tactical success left no monument. Yet by the time the Atlantic tide began to turn, the intellectual architecture was already in place. The linoleum floor had done its work. What began as chalk lines and smoke had become muscle memory at sea. Decisions made in darkness now echoed decisions rehearsed on land. This was the culmination of her development, not a moment of triumph, but the quiet realization that ideas had escaped the room and taken hold. The war continued, brutal and costly, but the margin had shifted. And in a conflict measured by supply lines and survival, that shift was everything. By late 1942, the work inside Western Approach's tactical unit had reached a decisive test. The room had proven its logic repeatedly, but logic alone does not change wars. Authority does, and authority in the Atlantic rested with the men who commanded fleets. When Admiral Max Horton entered the operations room, the atmosphere shifted. He was not a symbolic visitor. He was the officer responsible for Britain's Western Approaches, a former submariner who understood the enemy from the inside. If anyone could expose weakness in the method, it would be him. If anyone could dismiss the games as clever illusions, it would be a man of his experience. The exercise began without ceremony. Horton assumed the role of the U-boat commander. He chose routes, speeds, and tactics informed by years beneath the surface. Opposing him was an escort group guided by Okell's logic. There were no explanations offered, no instructions softened for rank. The game moved forward. The first engagement ended quickly. The submarine was detected, compressed, and eliminated. Horton adjusted. He altered timing, shifted approach angles, exploited ambiguity. The second run followed. The result did not change. The third run followed the same pattern. Then the fourth. Then the fifth. Each repetition stripped away excuses. Chance could not explain consistency. nor could error on the enemy's part. The outcomes were converging, not diverging. The method closed space predictably, regardless of variation. What Horton confronted was not a trick, but inevitability. The tension in the room was quiet and absolute. Chalk lines tightened, time compressed. Every movement reduced future options. Horton recognized the sensation immediately, not from games, but from combat. The moment when a submarine realizes the sea has become a cage. The moment before escape ceases to exist. When the exercise ended, there was no declaration of victory, no acknowledgement of defeat. The significance lay in what followed. Horton did not argue. He did not request clarification. He accepted the lesson, and in doing so, he transferred authority from tradition to evidence. That acceptance marked the pivot. What had been tested became taught. What had been demonstrated became doctrine. The tactics refined on the linoleum floor were no longer provisional. They entered training programs, briefing materials, and operational planning. The distance between rehearsal and execution disappeared. For the Atlantic War, this shift mattered more than any single sinking. It meant escorts no longer reacted blindly. It meant commanders trusted concentration over dispersion, patience over panic. It meant submarines encountered resistance that anticipated them rather than chased them. For Okell, the climax passed without ceremony. Her role concluded not with recognition, but with absorption. The ideas moved on without her name attached. This was the price of intellectual warfare. Success erased its authorship, yet the outcome was unmistakable. Losses at sea did not end overnight, but patterns changed. Survival rates improved. The balance between hunter and hunted narrowed. The Atlantic ceased to be an uncontested killing ground. The climax of her contribution did not occur at sea, nor under fire. It occurred in silence, when authority conceded to evidence. When the war's most dangerous enemy was not overpowered by force, but cornered by understanding. And once that understanding took hold, the Atlantic could no longer behave as it once had. The consequences of what happened in that room unfolded quietly, measured not by headlines, but by tonnage curves and survival rates. Convoys began to behave differently. Escorts held together instead of fragmenting. Contact reports were treated as probabilities to be managed, not alarms to be chased. Submarines found fewer gaps, fewer moments of confusion to exploit. The Atlantic did not suddenly become safe, but it became less blind. This shift mattered because the war at sea was a war of margins. A single convoy saved meant factories fed, airfields supplied, cities heated. The impact of improved tactics multiplied outward. Invisible but cumulative. Officers trained through the Western Approach's tactical unit carried those lessons into night watches and storm conditions, long after the chalk had been wiped from the floor. Yet the outcomes created a paradox for those who made them possible. Success left no physical trace. There were no wrecks to point to, no battle honors to list. When a convoy arrived intact, it appeared unremarkable. When a submarine disengaged early, it left no evidence of what had been prevented. The better the system worked, the harder it became to see who had built it. For Janet Okell, this invisibility defined the aftermath. She did not command ships in victory parades. She did not receive public commendations tied to specific actions. Her contribution dissolved into procedure, embedded so deeply in practice that it no longer appeared novel. This was not neglect so much as design. Tactical innovation, once absorbed, erases its origin. As the war progressed and eventually ended, the narrative of the Atlantic favored hardware and command. New ships, new aircraft, decisive leadership. The intellectual labor that connected those elements faded into the background. Women who had shaped outcomes through analysis returned to anonymity, their work classified, understated, or simply forgotten. The consequences extended beyond recognition. The emotional residue remained. Years spent calculating survival without participating in its celebration left a quiet imprint. There was no clear moment when the work ended, no final exercise that closed the ledger. The war simply moved on, carrying its methods forward without acknowledgement. In historical terms, the result was an imbalance. The Atlantic was remembered as a triumph of production and power. Less remembered was the transformation of thinking that made those advantages effective. The absence of that story narrowed understanding, turning a complex victory into a simplified one. What endured, however, was effect. The war's outcome bore the mark of decisions rehearsed far from the sea. Even if the names were lost, the logic persisted. And in that persistence lay the true consequence of Okell's work, a change in how war was fought, without a change in who history chose to remember. Janet Okell left no battlefield behind her. There is no wreck marked with her name, no photograph of her standing beside a captured enemy. What remains is harder to see and easier to overlook, a way of thinking that altered outcomes without announcing itself. Her legacy lies in the quiet truth that modern warfare is often decided far from the front line, not by those who pull triggers, but by those who ask the right questions early enough. The work she did at Western Approach's tactical unit demonstrated that intellect, when disciplined and tested, can become as lethal as any weapon. It also revealed how easily such contributions vanish once they are absorbed into routine. There is an unease in this kind of remembrance. It forces a reckoning with how history assigns value. Acts of visible courage are celebrated. Acts of invisible prevention are not. Lives saved do not leave evidence. Disasters avoided create no monuments. The better the thinking, the less there is to commemorate. Okell's story also challenges assumptions about authority. She did not rise through rank. She did not command by order. She influenced through inevitability. When evidence became undeniable, power adjusted. That adjustment, not any single tactic, was her most enduring achievement. In a broader sense, her life represents countless others whose wartime labor remains unrecorded. Women who analyzed, calculated, and rehearsed survival for people they would never meet. Their reward was not recognition, but the knowledge that fewer ships failed to arrive, fewer families received telegrams, fewer losses became necessary. To remember Janet Okell is to widen the lens of history, to accept that wars are not only won by those at sea or in the air, but also by those who never leave the room where decisions are shaped. Her contribution reminds us that power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it works in silence, altering the course of events so thoroughly that its presence disappears. The Atlantic War ended long ago. The methods endure. And the question remains, how many victories in history belong to people whose names were never meant to be spoken?